And it's 2 minutes past the hour, so if people haven't joined, they can still pop on, but I think we'll go ahead and get started today. Thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar today, Modern SharePoint Search Webpart, How to Make Taxonomy and Manage Metadata Indispensable in SharePoint. Few pieces of business before we start. One, we are recording this webinar, and I will also be sharing the PowerPoint slides that we're going to look at today. The slides do have some links within that I'll reference throughout the webinar. So if you are missing a link or not sure where it was, that will all be in the slides, and I will try my best to throw them into the chat as we go. The second piece of business is that if you look in your GoToWebinar panel, there is a place where you can enter your own questions. I'm not going to stop during the webinar to answer any questions, but once we go through the content, there will be a Q&A, and I will look at those questions and answer the ones I can today. If there's not time to answer a question that gets posted there, I always do create a handout of Q&A after with written answers. So put your question in there. If we don't address it today, you will get an answer with the follow-up materials, the recording, the slides. My name is Mark Lair. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at WAND, and WAND is a company in Denver, Colorado that's focused on taxonomies. Personally, I've been with WAND for almost 18 years now. I have extensive experience developing taxonomies. I lead the development of our taxonomy library, helping clients customize and implement taxonomies, and have built up quite a bit of expertise around the taxonomy capabilities of SharePoint. I've conducted a few webinars in the past about how to use taxonomies and the term store in SharePoint. So that's the expertise that I bring to the table today, and I'm looking forward to sharing some information about the modern search webparts today. And before I'll quickly do a little bit about WAND. WAND has been building taxonomy since 1983. Like I said, we're based in Denver, Colorado, and we're a boutique firm focused on helping organizations develop taxonomy models. And the way that we do that is primarily via our WAND Taxonomy Library. So we have developed predefined taxonomies covering most industry vertical segments and business functional areas. And our clients can access this library to jumpstart a taxonomy project. And apropos today, in particular to SharePoint, clients can download the taxonomies that are relevant to their business functions and their industry vertical segment. And it really transforms a taxonomy or a managed metadata project from a build into an edit. And the good news is, while taxonomy can sometimes be a challenging topic for people to grasp, people are good editors. So if you can give them something that's been professionally built, for example, your human resources department or workplace health and safety, or folks on the manufacturing line, whatever it might be, they can provide that relevant feedback to a foundation taxonomy to quickly get them to quickly create a taxonomy that's customized for your organization. I'm trying to dispense with all the commercials about WAND up front because this is designed to be an educational webinar, but just very quickly, the way we do provide taxonomies to our clients is via the WAND Taxonomy Library portal. So you can browse through and download any of the taxonomies that we have that you like into SharePoint term store format, and they can be customized and imported into SharePoint. So again, we're trying to jumpstart the process of enabling you to populate your term store with highly relevant business metadata. With that in mind, we're going to jump over to the agenda. And part of the education we want to do today is, why would you want to do a taxonomy project in the first place? And I'm very excited about the content today because, as many of you know, SharePoint has been evolving all the way back from SharePoint 2010 on premise, when the term store and taxonomy capabilities were first introduced, all the way to today when we're starting to look at SharePoint 2019 and 365 and SharePoint Online, and SharePoint is moving from the classic experience to the modern experience. one thing that we've really seen is that the modern experience, particularly the search, hasn't supported taxonomy and managed metadata in the way that we, I think, as a community, and WAND in particular as well, would like to see, from the perspective of the search and the refiners and the customizations that classic search enabled. So we're going to be talking through about how that's no longer an issue. And before we get started, I just want to do a quick poll. And I'm going to launch it, and we'll just do one of these today in case. So if you guys will indulge me. But the poll today is the inability to customize the modern search experience limited your organizations or prevented your organization from adopting modern SharePoint. I just bring this is an informal poll, but this is certainly a feature gap that we've seen on message boards and the user voice and in the Microsoft community. So curious about folks' experience today. While you're answering that poll, I'll kind of walk through what our agenda today is. We're going to start with a slide deck. We're going to go through a brief overview of taxonomy and managed metadata for SharePoint. Then we will talk about the Microsoft Sharepoint framework and the patterns and practices and kind of how we came to, how these new web parts came to be and what these mean. Then we're going to actually try to go hands-on and we will download and install the web parts into SharePoint Online. We'll show you how to configure those modern search web parts and show you how to create a custom SharePoint search experience with the modern environment. And then we'll wrap up, talk about some of the limitations, and then go into the Q&A. With that, I'll close the poll. Share the results. So we see 13% of you, it's definitely been a barrier, a blocker, the inability to have the modern search. Half of you somewhat, a quarter of you not at all, and 13% not sure. These results, I'd expected to see a lot of somewhat, as you know that the modern experience and the classic experience are still existing side by side. So there's some great new features in the modern document library experience around tagging and other elements. And the modern search is really good as well. So I think there's ways that you can adopt some modern elements and rely on classic for others. But we believe that these new web parts are going to be an exciting new capabilities. Looking forward to show them to you today. Okay, so the first thing we'll talk about is what actually is a taxonomy and what is managed metadata and tagging in SharePoint and why is that important? I'm going to just do a brief summary today. If you want to go do a deep dive, we've done a previous webinar called Managed Metadata 101, Taxonomy and Tagging in SharePoint, that goes very deep and detailed into this. So I'll touch on a few of these points today, but there's a link to those recordings in the slides if you want to go back and learn a little bit more about that. But a taxonomy is essentially just a collection of concepts for a given topic or subject domain that have been organized into a hierarchical tree structure. You can think of a taxonomy as a common vocabulary that stakeholders are going to use to label or classify information. So off on the right, we see a slice from the WAND Human Resources taxonomy. And you can see that a lot of important human resources concepts have been defined, or labels have been created for them, organized into a hierarchical structure, which means from a broad, able to drill down into more narrow concepts. So we see employee ethics and conduct policy has things like absenteeism and tardiness within, or fraternization or gift policy, all within more specific instances. The hierarchy is useful to help people navigate and find the concepts that they're interested in, and it can also be helpful to roll up and roll down. The important thing to know is that the individual categories from the taxonomy are what are going to be tagged to documents or lists or people, whatever it might be, as metadata. So if you take anything away about what a taxonomy is, I would say that it's a common vocabulary of potential metadata that can be used to describe and organize information. So that's a summary of what a taxonomy is. I said we're going to use it for tagging, and what do we mean by tagging? Tagging simply means applying metadata to documents, and I'd like to talk about two different types of metadata, and a colloquial or a common, perhaps a cliche description of what metadata is it's just data about data. But I think more specifically or more usefully, it's called, I would describe metadata as how we describe things. Now, the two types of metadata that we think of are administrative metadata and descriptive metadata. Administrative metadata are things like date, file size, file type, author. Things that if you were to right-click on a Word document on your desktop and go to View Properties, most of that administrative metadata is already going to be collected. Modified date, created date, things of that nature. Administrative metadata is super easy to get. It's often just done automatically when a file is created. Unfortunately, it's not particularly useful for finding or describing the content of the document for search. So what we're really interested in when we talk about tagging and taxonomies is descriptive metadata. And I define descriptive metadata as one or multiple words about the content of the document. It's really describing the topic of the document, and that's where taxonomy is coming in as far as a common vocabulary of topics that we're going to use to describe the content of the document. And if we think of things from a search perspective or an organization perspective, it's really the descriptive metadata that's going to be most useful to help people find relevant information. So it's those descriptive tags that are going to power search refiners, library filters, some dynamic content web parts on SharePoint pages. So if you kind of think of a search perspective and the difference between administrative and descriptive metadata, how often do you have a search result list of several hundred documents and it's useful to filter it based on the size of the document or the modified date? Sometimes, but more likely it's useful to be able to filter it based on that descriptive metadata. So that's what tagging is, that's what descriptive metadata and taxonomy are, and that's why those are important. And as it relates to today's topic, the inability to have modern search refiners in SharePoint has prevented people from making that descriptive metadata available to users from a refinement perspective. So I think that's been a frustrating feature gap. And like I said today, I think it's going to be exciting to see how we can close that gap. As I briefly mentioned, that's kind of a broad overview of taxonomies and tagging, but we have done some previous webinars. They're all linked on our knowledge library with recordings. The Manage Metadata 101, if you're going to look at any of these, that's the one I think people find most useful and has been most popular. That's just a tutorial on the term store in SharePoint, which is where you manage taxonomies, how to set up the Manage Metadata columns, kind of the ins and outs of tagging with descriptive metadata in SharePoint. The Manage Metadata 201 gets a little bit more involved into some of the advanced features like setting up the field as managed properties, setting up left-hand refiners, using managed navigation. Our Manage Metadata 301 goes into taxonomy governance a bit. The 140 has a tutorial on the taxonomy specific capabilities of the modern document library experience as opposed to the classic, which really I think the modern document library experience is fantastic from a taxonomy and a tagging perspective. And then last, we did a Manage Metadata 415, which talks about taxonomy-based skills profiles in SharePoint. So using taxonomies to actually tag people, not just documents, but the skills and expertise that people may have. And we do an overview of an add-on for SharePoint called Discover Me, which provides some advanced skills profiles and expertise search. So why is this all important? Why do we care about descriptive metadata? What's the point of doing this anyway, and the crux of it is that employees need great findability. A search consulting group out of Europe, FindWise, did an annual enterprise search and findability survey. The latest one is 2016, but I think we've seen statistics like this from a wide variety of sources, spanning back from the early 2000s. And it's an interesting point, is that what proportion of employees are dependent on good findability in their daily work. And you can see that most of these organizations say that it's above 50% of their employees need good findability. So if you're not providing that for users with SharePoint or whatever your knowledge sharing environment is going to be, you're actually actively preventing people from doing a good job. So employees need findability. I think information sharing is important. The second slide, the question talks about what information areas are most important. And you can see that the top 3-4 areas are subject matter areas or knowledge areas, people, processes, projects, and cases. And these are all things that are going to strongly benefit from having a vocabulary, having descriptive metadata so that people can search for the topics that they're interested in. This all speaks to taxonomy. And as we go forward, the ability to have taxonomy-based refiners in the search experience. Not just external sources and research groups that think taxonomy is important. This is a tweet that I got a screen grab of from Chris McNulty, who's a senior marketing manager around the SharePoint product at Microsoft. So if anyone knows what Microsoft is planning around metadata in SharePoint, it would be Chris. And I think this tweet speaks for itself, but I'll read it anyway. Managed metadata is essential to the present and future of SharePoint. So tagging, organizing information is important. And the features we're going to look at today is a way to take advantage of the organization that you do of your information. So I've stepped on this slide a little bit earlier, but I've talked about why taxonomy is important and refiners are important from findability, but there's just one problem, and it's that the SharePoint modern search experience hasn't supported custom refiners. Like I've said, that's a major feature gap, I think, perceived by the SharePoint community. Certainly, as an evangelist of taxonomies, Wand strongly believes that's a major feature gap. It's frustrating, I think, for people. It's a feature that's frequently been mentioned. It was actually announced, the ability to have custom refiners, all the way back in May 2018, but it's still missing from the core product. And that's just the way that Microsoft is doing things now. They're not always providing huge visibility into their roadmaps. I think people are kind of wondering, when's this capability going to be available? So a couple things to be aware of before we get the answer to that question. Two things. One is the Sharepoint framework. So the Sharepoint framework, this is just copied and pasted, I think, from Wikipedia or from a Microsoft resource. But broadly, this is a new development framework that Microsoft made available in early 2018 that provides a lot more flexibility to create some client-side development for building SharePoint experiences, and create some ways to more easily integrate with the data within SharePoint, more easy than what was available with SharePoint Online previously. There were some limitations, but the availability of the Sharepoint framework wiped away some of those limitations. Second thing going on is there is a SharePoint development community known as SharePoint PNP, Patterns and Practices, and this is also a copy and pasted description, but it's an open source initiative coordinated by SharePoint Engineering. So in this community, people are developing some SharePoint Webpart, some development, some ways to use SharePoint more effectively or extend SharePoint. It's not baked into the core product, but they're web parts that are available to people and semi-officially from Microsoft. So with that in mind, in August, the Patterns and Practices group released 6 new modern search web parts that help solve a lot of the problems we just talked about on the previous slides, that you can't do the recliners, customizing the SharePoint experience. And now we can. In those 6 web parts, got a search box, search recliners, search pagination, search results, which is missing a bullet point, search verticals, and search navigation. So this is really the topic of the webinar today that we're going to go look at. How do we use these 6 web parts? How do we get them, first of all, because they're not built into SharePoint? And then how do we use these 6 web parts to build a more modern, SharePoint modern search experience with the customizations and controls that people are used to from the classic Enterprise Search Center. I'm not going to read through this whole slide, but here's just some of the things that these 6 web parts are providing. Like I said, customizable search queries, static or dynamic search. We can actually use the search results web part to replicate some of what we've seen in the content search web part that I think was popular to present dynamic content actually in the absence of a formal user query. Like I said, a couple links. So let's take a look. And that link we just looked at on that slide, that's going to be available to you. But that's important because that's where we're going to start to get the web parts. So before we actually download these web parts, well, actually, let's download them first. I'm going to stick with my script. So the web parts are available on GitHub. The SharePoint Development Solutions has a page on GitHub, just so people can follow along if they like. I'm going to throw that link in the chat now. Like I said, it is available in, these links are all going to be available in the slides. So this is where the modern search web parts are available. We're looking at version 3.6.3.0. There's some release notes. This is, I think, a great page to keep your eye on in general because things are changing, new versions are being released fairly frequently. So where you want to go to download it is just scroll down. Little confusing, not super confusing, but I made a mistake the first time around. There's 2 packages. One is from the earlier version, which only has, it's about 736 kilobytes. That's not the one you want. You actually want the one that doesn't have the date within. So pnp-react-search-refiners.sppkg, 2.45 megabytes. That's the correct one to get. So you're just going to download it. I've already done so. The other page that I think is useful is the SP Dev Solutions main page. There's a sub page on the Sharepoint Framework Modern Search Refiners. I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And why I bring that up is it has a more extensive summary. This is where I copy and pasted that slide content for my deck. And the PMP group has also done their own webcast. So if you get tired of hearing my voice or I'm not doing a nice job of explaining something, this is another source that you can use to see what they're doing. It also goes into pretty deep written description on what some of the components do and what the options are for configuring. So that's a good resource. We're going to walk through a lot of this today on the webinar, but to accommodate different learning styles, I wanted to provide these to you. So before we get into configuring the web parts, I want to provide a little bit of just context. Like I said, we're going to do a 3-minute version of all the previous webinars. about taxonomy and tagging in SharePoint. First thing to be aware of is the term store. So the term store is the place in SharePoint where you're going to manage taxonomies. And you can see there's a lot of taxonomies loaded in here. We click on specific concepts. We can do definitions and create new concepts. But the construct, that the common thread of all my webinars is I've created a made-up example where I'm somebody who wants to organize content around SharePoint events. So I've created a few taxonomies: the event name, Microsoft Ignite, SharePoint Fest, SharePoint Saturday, Worldwide Partner Conference. I've created a location taxonomy of where the conferences actually are. Content audience. And then there's like a document taxonomy that says, or conference form, says the type of information it is that the conference is about. So the made-up example is you want to come find out how to sponsor a certain SharePoint event, or what's the registration or the schedule or call for speakers. You can come to the SharePoint site that I've created. So I've, for previous webinars, created a document library of the SharePoint events, and you can see here that we have all these documents checked in, and here we've tagged. This is in the modern library, so here's the name of the document. Here's the conference location. These are managed metadata columns, which means they're going to be populated by terms from a taxonomy. Here's the document type, some administrative metadata like the modified date, the event name, and the audience level. And we can quickly just see some advantages of how you may interact with taxonomy in the modern library experience. There's two panels over here: the information panel, which is going to be germane to any specific document. What's great about the modern experience is you can tag right in this information panel. You don't have to bring up the edit properties. And what the taxonomy is providing is the ability to choose from a defined list. So here we've defined the taxonomy is calling it UK, not the United Kingdom. It would be fine to call it the United Kingdom. The important thing with the taxonomy is that everyone's using the same concept when they're doing it. They're doing their labeling. So the tagging experience is going to allow you to do both type ahead, like we saw there, or browse through the taxonomy to do the actual tagging. Second thing in the modern experience for the document library is just the filter panel. Again, this is a real brief tour, but with all this content, we can actually filter through it based on some of the taxonomies or the fields that are set up. So I can say I'm interested only in Microsoft Ignite, and I want call for speakers. And that's going to filter down to the one document that says Ignite and is a call for speakers. So this shows how taxonomy is going to quickly allow us within a document library to filter through a larger set of content to get exactly to what I'm looking for. So modern document library experience supports taxonomy really well and adds a lot of value to doing the tagging. But like I said, not well supported to date in the search. So what are we left with? Before all the great things you're going to learn today, if you want to use refiners in the search experience, you really have to stick with the classic search. So here's a classic search experience. This is the refinement panel. Webpart has been set up. I've just done a query for SharePoint, and you can see there's several hundred results. There's several hundred results. It's unlikely that people are going to browse through or page through results, page and page of results to find what they want. So the descriptive metadata gives users the ability to narrow that 495 results. And just as we did within the library, we can click on the event type. There's 27 tagged with SharePoint Saturday. These filter counts update dynamically based on what's now in the result set. Call for speakers, Twin Cities. In 3 clicks, I've gone from 495 results down to 2. That's the power of metadata and of taxonomies. But again, not available in the modern search experience. So let's see what the modern search experience provides us. This is just the out of the box, and we'll click on show more results to get the complete experience. So the modern search experience, this is what's out of the box, and it's good. It's definitely more modern from a look and the feel. It's a responsive page. We can see my results. Can certainly drag down, etc. But we go to filters. Last modified time is all we have. So to go back earlier, how useful is this to filter through my search results? Not super useful versus being able to provide that descriptive metadata. I think that's where people are running into trouble or frustration, not being able to have this type of search experience, but with the filters and refiners that they're used to. So with that in mind, let's see how we can overcome this barrier. So the first thing we need to do, I took a brief gap in doing some explaining, but we've downloaded our Webparts. We need to install them now to make them available. So the way that we do that is we're going to come to our admin, the 365 admin center. We're going to go to the SharePoint admin. Classic features and apps. And app catalog. In case you're wishing we had one more click, we do. We can now go to distribute apps for SharePoint, so making the apps available for the end users. This is the app catalog. And here's the apps for SharePoint. We can actually just do a drag and drop. So this is actually already installed. You can see the version, but all you have to do is take the package that we downloaded it and bring it in. I'm not going to replace it because I'm too fearful of breaking something, but you're going to upload it, and that's about it. That's as easy it is. That's as difficult as it is. It's quite easy. You're going to now see that product ID, the web parts, the version, etc. It should look very similar to this. Now that's available to you and to your users. So those web parts are ready. Let's go see how we get them set up. So I'm going to go to my webinar sandbox, and I'm going to come up here, and I'm just going to create a new page. Now, one thing to be aware of, few limitations around these web parts, but one of the limitations is that you can't actually use them on this main search page. So we're still sort of stuck as far as the out-of-the-box modern search bar up here. Can't add web parts to this yet. I expect that's going to change in the future since it has been announced, like I said, but in the meantime, what you can do is create your own page and direct people to that for search. So we're going to add a page. Make sure you're creating a modern page. Which I did not do. But this is actually a classic page. So I'll go to my site content. Wouldn't be any fun to have a webinar if you didn't make a few misclicks here and there. So I'll be transparent. I'm not sure why that happened. When I used that gearbox earlier to add a page, it created a modern page, and that time it created a classic page. So that's all. I will claim my expertise around managed metadata and taxonomy for SharePoint, but I won't claim my overall SharePoint expertise. But we have passed that. So modern search part. Webinar, I'm just going to name it. That doesn't really matter. But we now have a new page. So we have a little area where we're going to be able to place our web parts. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to create a new section. Create it how you like. That's the beauty of the modern experience. It's pretty easy to throw things in and put them in different areas. I like to do this 1/3 left column. It's just a little bit more traditional. So now we have 2 sections on the page. Now we need to throw our web parts in place. So we're going to build the page. Can't do search without a search box, can we? So when you're at a web part, it's going to pop this box. The ones we're interested in and should be available to you now are these 6. Search, 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 search. We'll start with the search box. Now we've got that. We have a search box. We need a place to put the results. So that's going to be our search results. I think if you have search results, if there's more than a certain number, you want to give, although it may not be strongly used, you do want to give people the ability to. So that's the search pagination web part. And then the last, which I like to have on the left-hand side, are going to be the search refiners. I say last, and because I'm only going to build 4 of these for sake of sort of time and simplicity. The 2 others are the search verticals and the search navigation. We'll look at those. Those are basically, in the past, kind of ways to do scoping. So the verticals are going to allow you to search just people or videos. The search navigation is going to essentially allow you to do the same, but it's going to take you to an entirely different page for the results. Kind of more advanced configuration stuff, I think, just be aware that those are available, but we're not going to go through those in detail today. So I'm going to add the search refiners. Now we have the framework for our search page. And we can begin to configure these web parts. So the first one we're going to configure is the search box. And once you have the web parts, this little icon or control panel is going to come up and you click the pencil to edit the web part. And we're just going to go through each of these options. So the first is it a, what's kind of the search query setting, what's going into the box. The dynamic data source is going to be useful if we were populating based on a search box from another page. So this may make more sense in context when we look at the search results configuration. But for the purposes of just a traditional search experience, we're going to leave this unchecked. If it was dynamic, it would mean, we might be pre-populating the query based on some other element. So we're not going to have it dynamic. We're going to leave that empty. That'll allow the user to put their own. Next is the search box options. The query suggestions, those are things you can turn on or off. Those are things that are learned based on the user behavior, and they can also be managed or excluded. So the query suggestions, when you begin to type, it might suggest things, like in a traditional search engine, if you start to type in Microsoft SHA, Google would say, or Bing, I should use today, would say, oh, you might be looking for Microsoft Sharepoint. So those are the suggestions. We can turn those on or off. The placeholder text in the search box is just what the user is going to see. You can leave that blank if you want. I'll say, what would you like to find? Make it a bit more friendly. Queried a new page. That's again is from like a dynamic data source. If you wanted to have a search box on any page within SharePoint, but then direct it to a different results page, that's what you would do here. And then that would control what query gets sent to that search result page. So we're going to leave that unchecked. And then the search query enhancement, kind of out of the scope of this webinar, but this allows you to use the natural language processing service, and specifically the Microsoft LUIS, but it's going to help with relevance and improving the search results in the query and kind of doing some learning. I'm going to do a little hand waving on explaining that. We're going to leave it off for purposes of this webinar, but just know that's an additional bell and whistle. So now the search box is configured. Pretty easy. Next one we need to configure is the search results. We can click on the configure button. So this first choice is actually pretty impactful as far as the way you can use the search results page or the search results web part. You can actually use it similar to a content search web part with the ability to display content dynamically on a modern page based on this query. So if we didn't want to have a box, we just wanted to display like the 10 most recent documents that were tagged with or HR forms or news or whatever it might be, we could put these query keywords in here, and then that web part will display results based on this whatever keyword we put in here. So you don't actually have to have a user enter something in the search box. You can instead set this up here, and then when a user visits the page, they'll just get that search result. It's a way to display content dynamically on a page. Like I said, similar to that content search or content query web parts. So definitely something to be aware of, but we want to connect it to the search box. So we're going to click on this little ellipse menu item, connect to source. There's other ways you can do dynamic searches besides just the search box. You could do the page environment and do something based on the site properties or the user or a query string from another page. So that kind of goes to the dynamic data source on the search box that we talked about earlier. We're going to keep it simple and just choose search box. And then the search box property is just these, you don't have really any options. It's going to be the search query. And then you can say raw or NLP enhanced. That speaks, I think, to the Microsoft LUIS and the NLP. We'll just do a raw search query. And then you can choose whether to put something in there by default. I like to leave it blank, but again, that depends on your specific needs. Go next. Now we have a few options we can configure. So the first is the query template that's going to kind of define what happens with the query that goes in. I want to remove this path site because I want to search everything in SharePoint, not just this site. I'm going to leave it in the curly brackets, just the search terms. The result source identifier means we can limit the search results based on the GUID of the result sources. Those GUIDs can be found in the site collection administration. Again, that would be like if you just wanted to do a people search as a for example. Sort order, if we click on that, that's going to define how the results are prioritized. In this case, it's defaulted to just created ascending and size, descending. You can actually prioritize it based on any managed property you want. So there's a lot of power in these web parts to get to the managed properties and leverage those. I'm just going to leave the default. And then the next is the sortable fields themselves, meaning you can provide a UI interface where I can choose a managed property that somebody could actually sort by. Maybe that's average rating of the content as a for example. I think that instead of using sorters, the sort like this, the refiners and the filters are more useful. Again, depending on your use case, you may want to give the ability to do the sorting, so that's available here. Next do we want to connect it to a search refiners web part? This is pretty important. We do need to connect these two refiners together, so we're going to say yes and make sure that we choose the search refiners. Bear in mind that this is a two-way connection, so we're going to have to go to the Search Recliner Webpart and connect it to the Search Results Webpart. Not tricky at all, but just like, hey, if this isn't working, that would be something to check. Same with the search verticals. We're not doing the search vertical Webpart in this case, but that's also a two-way connector. Enable query rules, as you may know if you've used SharePoint Search, query rules are also set up in the search properties under the site settings, or site collection settings. So this just tells you if you're going to turn them on or off. If they're on, it'll support things that you've set up like best bets, etc. The selected properties, these are just properties you want to make sure that they're that you want to set as being retrieved, that you can use elsewhere in the configuration. We'll touch on this in a moment. That's a little bit more of a bell and whistle as you're getting into customizing the search. Next is number of items to retrieve per page. That's just showing us how many documents are going to be on the search results. And you can increment by 1 all the way up to 20, and then you can increment by 1. So whatever you're comfortable with, you can just set it to 15. Next, and this is kind of a cool integration with the term store and with taxonomy, is do you want to enable taxonomy value localization for refiners and results? And what that basically means is that if you have translated your taxonomy, let's say you have a multinational company and you have users in Europe who speak Spanish, and the tagging has been done in English or whatever it might be. If you translate your taxonomy into both English and Spanish, if the user comes from an English search interface or English interface language, their refiners will display in English. If they come in Spanish, their refiners will display in Spanish. So a great, I think, detail that they thought of, and another benefit of taxonomy versus just keywords or free text tagging, which don't translate well, or it's more challenging to manage that. The next thing is another feature. They've kind of hidden it in here, but I don't think it should be hidden. I think it's pretty exciting, is you can actually configure synonyms. So this has been the feature that's been available in the on-premise version of SharePoint for quite a while, but not accessible in SharePoint Online, and that's the ability to have synonyms within the search. What the synonyms in the search basically mean is it's to make sure people are getting complete result set. So if I search for HR, I should also get documents that have the word human resources in them, and vice versa. So I can begin to create a thesaurus here. Twin Cities, Minneapolis. Someone searches for Twin Cities. I want them to see things that have the word Minneapolis in them, because my SharePoint Saturday event is labeled Twin Cities, but it's actually in Minneapolis for my example. So we can create these synonyms, and that's going to actually do a query expansion. So it's going to search for HR or human resources. In the past, that really hasn't been easily done in SharePoint Online. Like I said, in SharePoint on-premise, you could upload a search thesaurus. It's important to know that this has to be managed here. There are synonyms in the term store, but those aren't used for query expansion. Those are only used for tagging purposes. So the synonyms, I think, is an awesome new feature. I was really happy to see it in the Webpart. So we're going to add those. Next is just the Webpart title. Do you want to have a label above the search results? Search results. Just show it as blank if there's no results. Show results count. I think that's always useful. And then the pagination Webpart, we are going to connect that. That's also a two-way connection. So when we configure the pagination Webpart, we'll connect it to the result set. Then the last few options are choose how we want the layout. Do you want it tiles or the people type experience, or the carousel, or just a simple list? I'm going to keep it as a detailed list. Depending on what you choose up here, you have the ability to actually customize that template. You can do some style sheet revisions here, and if you guys are proficient in coding, this would be the place to make those customizations. I'm going to leave it as the default. Last couple choices. the result type. This is just kind of the ability to customize the result based on some managed property conditions. Again, this gets into more tuning of the search. And then managed columns, I think slightly more important. What columns do you want to display within the search result for the content? And it defaults to title, created, summary. Maybe we don't care about created, you can delete those, or you can add any sort of, again, managed properties. And then some other, do you want to show the file icon and is it in compact mode or not? So we'll close that out. That's now configured. We're now going to configure the refiners. First thing, just to make sure we don't forget, do that two-way connection to the search result Webpart. So that's now connected. And we want to go in and actually edit the refiners. I'm going to get rid of created in size because, as I said earlier, I don't find the administrative metadata super useful if I just want my descriptive metadata. And it's going to let me choose a managed property. And you have to go to the search schema to see which ones you actually want. But for taxonomy within SharePoint Online, you need to use the refinable string values that have been pre-set up. We cover that in Manage Metadata 201, how to do that. So we're going to choose our refinable strings. I'm going to put a name of the filters, or a name that's going to show up on the filter or on the refiner location. Is it a multi-value or just a default refiner? It could be a date range depending on what type it is, but we're just going to choose default and we're going to sort it by number of results. And you can choose whether you want it to be expanded or not by default. Just say yes to show you an example of one. So we're going to go through and add a few of these refiners. I'm not going to expand that one by default. The first three I'm going to do are all relevant to my SharePoint Saturday content. But the last one I'm going to do is going to be related to just HR. And the reason I'm doing that is this shows that you can use refiners from across all sorts of different libraries. And you can actually create an enterprise search center where people can search for whatever they want across SharePoint and still get refiners based on the results that come back. And again, these are going to be security terms, et cetera. So you can set up all the refiners in one spot and just the ones that are relevant to the content that comes back in the search results are going to display. I think that's pretty nice. So those are saved. I'm going to put a title in there. You don't have to do it, but you can. And then the last choice for the refiners are going to be, do you want them to be vertical filter, to be just show up vertically, or to be a panel where you're going to click on filters? I think the vertical result is a little bit better. For sake of time, I'm just going to choose that one. That's something you can play with. The filters are going to be, the panel is going to be more similar to what we see in the modern document library. So the last one we need to configure is the search pagination Webpart. If you're looking at your watch, the good news is that's a quick one. You're really just going to connect it to the search result Webpart. Like I said, that's the bidirectional. While you're configuring, before we publish, you can actually do a search. I hope I did everything correctly. And now we have a modern experience. 793 results. There's my refiners on the left-hand side. You can see that the location is expanded. The other three are not. Click on that to expand them. SharePoint Saturday, that's going to update these counts. And then I'm down to 5 results for SharePoint. Remove these filters. If I go back to this Here's what the panel looks like. Click on filters and the panel pops up. I don't like that as much, but I'm sure reasonable people can disagree. That page is ready. One little bug I found is when you publish it, sometimes it's useful just to reload the page. Sometimes for some reason the queries got sticky. Do a search for human resources. You can see some of the query suggestions are starting to come up. It takes a while for those to populate, so nothing came up yet, but it was trying. I'm going to do search for human resources. Same, just the example we looked at before, or what I was talking about before, you can set up an enterprise search center and have all sorts of recliners, only the ones relevant to the results that are going to come back. And I'm looking at HR, and I can click to my sick leave form. So that's how you're going to set things up to use these new web parts to create a modern search experience with the customization and controls that I think people have grown to expect. With that, go back to the slides and then a quick Q&A. I suspected I would go a little bit long as we're coming up to the end of the hour, but a few limitations to be aware of on this web part. For now, it's Office 365, SharePoint Online only. I say for now, just because that's what it says on the Patterns and Practices page. I don't know if that will change and be available to on-premise or not. Second, can't be connected to the main search bar. We talked about that, so you actually do have to create a separate page and direct people to search there. You may experience a few bugs. It's an add-on web part. It's in GitHub. The source code's available to you, but just as anything, you might have some bugs. And just be aware it is provided as is. It's not part of the core product, but it is from the Patterns and Practices group, and I've had good experiences with it. Resources available, just be aware of this slide. This will link to a few articles, the source where you can download it, the more in-depth, and the webcast from the Patterns and Practices group itself. And with that, I'm going to open up this Q&A panel. See if anyone's asked me any questions. Great, we've got a lot of questions. Like I said, I am going to answer any of these questions, or make sure all these questions get answered in the written handout to follow up, but I'll try to address a few of these today. So here's one. I tried to download and install the package, and it stopped saying that it didn't have an app for the file type. You don't want to double click on the app when you download, or on the file when you downloaded it. You simply want to bring it to your desktop, and then you're going to drag it and drop it into the SharePoint App Store. If you try to open it on your desktop, I would expect you will be getting those errors. Here's a question. Can we direct the, this is, I'm going to bring it up because someone asked. I think I addressed it, but I want to make sure it's very clear. Can you redirect the out-of-the-box modern search to go to the custom search page? That's one of the limitations. Unfortunately, we cannot do that yet. I say yet because it's changing all the time. I expect that you will have the ability to do these customizations in the out-of-the-box search, just not quite there yet. Last question I will talk about, and then we'll wrap it up because we're at the end of the hour. Since you have to create a custom search page, how do you handle search for hundreds of site collections? I think that an important part of any search or information management initiative is the governance. And we're big fans of governance at WAND because you really shouldn't just create a taxonomy and then let it sit, it's going to get stale. So you need to govern the taxonomy, just as you need to govern your whole SharePoint environment. That means how are you setting up sites, site collections, document libraries, etc., and which metadata are you going to collect on information, which taxonomies do you need to create. So doing a preamble to, that's my preamble to the answer. But I think in the demo we showed that you can create refiners, you can add refiners from all sorts of managed properties, and the appropriate refiners will show up based on the search results. So if you're creating an enterprise search site that's designed to search all your site collections, you can have up to, I think, 100, maybe more refinable strings, which are going to be the managed properties driven by managed metadata columns. So you can set up to, from the taxonomy perspective, up to 100 of those refiners on a single search result page. Now, not all of those are going to show up. If someone comes and searches for HR, you should just see the HR related refiners, etc. The refiners are going to display based on what's relevant in the document set. So I don't want to understate the complexity on that. It does require some planning, but that's that might be how I would approach it. So because we are a few minutes after the hour, I'm going to conclude the webinar today. I want to thank everybody for joining. My contact details are on this page. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. We will be sharing the recording and the slides and a written FAQ with the answers to the questions that people have submitted today. There is a post-webinar survey. If you'd fill it out, we'd really appreciate it. But with that, again, this is Mark Claire from WAND, and I hope you've enjoyed the webinar today.